The following is a production of Medfield TV.
Hi, welcome to Our Town, Our Land, Our Future. This is a show that concentrates on what the Master Planning Committee for the former Medfield State Hospital land is doing. Today I have John Thompson, who is the chairman of the Buildings and Grounds Committee. We're going to talk a little bit about the buildings and what John's plans are for maintenance in the future. So welcome, John.
Thanks,
Good
Lucille.
to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, tell people what your background is.
Okay. My background is formal training is in glacial geology, so understanding landforms, water supplies. I did almost 6 months in Wyoming learning how to interpret landforms and understand natural geologic processes, and then spent a lot of time in graduate school studying local geology in New England, particularly glacial geology, which is the study of our landforms. So I'm a person that looks at stone walls and decides the origin of where those stones came from, why the land is shaped the way it is. And the land that we walk on today is basically the same shape and slope that people walked on 15,000 years ago. And so a lot of people don't realize that, but that's my passion, and that's part of what drew me to the Medfield State Hospital property. It's a spectacular piece of property. My current employment, I'm self-employed as a cleanup professional for environmentally impaired properties. So. I'm interested in cleaning up these past sites where there's been contaminated property. And so I served on the Conservation Commission and was a resource person to the initial reuse committee for the state hospital property. And that led into later on my work as a mediator for the town involved in the cleanup of the former landfill area that was associated with the state hospital. And in doing that, I fell in love with the land and the landforms of that property. It's a very special piece of property, and we can talk a little bit more about that as we go forward.
And just, you mentioned the remediation, the gateway at the Charles is stunning, stunningly beautiful. And yes, we could not have a better person taking care of the buildings and grounds, John.
Well, thank you. It's a daunting task, but I spent so many hours passing by those the buildings, it really piqued my interest in how are they used and what's the history of the state hospital property, because it's fascinating to look at those buildings. There's not many places left in the United States where you can see a former state hospital, and it's really a vestige of the way that we manage mental health in the United States. And it's gone through my mind many times as to whether it was the right thing to do or the right way to do it versus the way mental health patients are treated today. But I still have a lot to learn about how the former state hospital was used to compare it to how mental health patients are treated today.
And that's another huge, huge issue.
It is. Yeah. It's a huge issue. And so my focus has been with Buildings and Grounds to try to provide a volunteer service to the town where we watch over these buildings, at least in this interim period while we're trying to decide what the town would like to do with the property.
So the buildings, so tell us a little bit about the purpose of the committee and who else is on it.
Okay. The purpose of the Buildings and Grounds Committee is really to watch over and manage not only the buildings but also the grounds for any uses of the property, and also to keep the property safe so that people can go up, people in Medfield can go up, and other towns can go up and enjoy the property, because it's, as I said, it's a spectacular piece of property. There's not many.
And it's our land now.
It's our land and it's ours to use, and people need to go up and enjoy it. It's a very unique piece of property. There's not many places where you have high elevation property that's flat on the top. And so you can walk for over an hour there, pass by the buildings, enjoy the architecture of the buildings without really any strenuous activity other than a healthy walk around the former campus.
Great. And so who else is on the committee, John?
So my committee is myself as chairman, the chief of police, the fire chief, Bobby Kennedy from Public Works, and Paul Hinckley, who's an abutter to the property. And we meet approximately monthly to discuss the maintenance costs of the property. And also, we entertain people that would want to use the property in certain ways. And they need to come before the committee if they want to have a function up there, for instance. And I think the schools have come to us for certain uses on the property. And some town groups have also come to ask to use the property. And also, there's some outside entities that want to take advantage of the property for its being an open space and available to use. Dog walkers are particularly happy up there, and it's a wonderful place to walk your dog. And if you have many dogs, you can let them kind of off the leash and enjoy it. We've had pretty good success with that, I have to say, and people have been very respectful of the property in that sense.
Yeah, every time I'm up there, there's plenty of people walking their dogs or running and doing lots of fun things. It looks terrific up there, John. You've done a great job in maintaining. Tell us, taking care of the buildings, making sure they're all locked up, and the grounds. So tell us kind of what is involved in, what are you thinking as you're doing all of this, and what are your plans going forward to continue to maintain while the Master Planning Committee is coming up with a plan?
The process of maintenance of the buildings and the grounds really started at the ground level. When we bought the property in December of 2014, there was a lot of overgrowth from the previous fall, and we wanted to make sure last spring that we cut down a lot of the poison ivy that was growing on the sides of the building. There was a lot of brush adjacent to the buildings that we wanted to clear away. And that was really twofold. We didn't want people's dogs to come in contact with poison ivy and then bring that home, and we wanted to keep the property open and clear from a safety perspective. So when you walk up there today, you'll see that when you are on one side of the campus, you have pretty much a clear view around and beside the buildings to the other side of the campus. We paid particular emphasis in clearing the brush around and away and bringing up the branches on the trees to make a safety view shed across the campus. Initially, we had to cut down about 35 or 40 dead trees. There was lots of dead trees, and when you have a lot of dead trees around, it's actually not good for the healthy trees. Trees need air circulation, and they need a lot of sunshine and air, and the campus hadn't been very well maintained by the state during their tenure, and so our emphasis was to clear away a lot of the dead growth on the campus so that the remaining trees could have a better environment to grow and for the future. And we've seen that work. I mean, we had a couple of storms this winter, and we didn't have that many trees that fell over on the campus, just a few. Mostly we had some big branches that came down from the white pines because white pines are brittle by nature, and when we had that heavy wet snow, there were a few big branches that came down. And I have to say, Public Works has been a huge help on the campus. They really have all pitched in to help keep the campus open and safe. As far as security goes, the police department has been excellent in going through the property at least twice during an 8-hour shift at random times. And they've been excellent in helping identify places where kids might break into the building. There are two classes of people that are interested in getting in the buildings, and our job is to keep them out.
Right.
One of the classes is what people call an urban explorer.
Yeah, so interesting.
And urban explorers are generally, not high school age kids. They're post-high school aged kids that some of them travel quite far to investigate old state hospitals or old abandoned buildings, and they're really interested in photography. That's their main interest, is some beautiful photography of the insides of these buildings. Now, we are trying to keep them out as best we can for safety reasons. Right.
The buildings are just not safe.
The buildings, most of them are not safe. There's about half of them that are in a state of disrepair. The other half are actually pretty good. It breaks down to 17 of the core buildings are safe for entry, and 12 of the core buildings are not safe for entry. We also have cottages, which are houses that formerly were built for some of the managers of the state hospital. One was the steward, the chief engineer, the matron. They all had their own house to live in so that they could be close to where they work every day. And the town owns those houses. There's 7 of them, and 2 of them are in a state of disrepair. 5 of them are in good condition. So we're working to try to maintain the buildings so that urban explorers aren't tempted to get into the buildings. And the other class of people that are interested in entering the buildings are kids, are high school age kids.
Yeah, that's
that sometimes are interested in vandalism. We don't usually see vandalism once in urban explorers if they were to break in.
Right.
I've seen more vandalism with high school age kids that are just out to have a good time, and unfortunately we've had to respond to that. And the police will prosecute people that are caught going into the buildings. So we've actually had a very good track record, I think, considering that there's 33 buildings on the campus. There's only a few left that really seem to be more attractive to people that might want to get into the buildings, and we've done a good job boarding them up. And we've put boards on the 2nd floor during a 2nd phase of boarding that we did this past January. And part of the reason for that is that as rocks were thrown through windows, you get more air and weather going into the building, and we really don't want that. So I'd like to do another phase of boarding up this coming year as the budget allows. And each time we do that, it's really one-time cost that helps to protect the buildings for many years. It's not something that we have to redo every year. Boarding up can last for over 10 years, really, once it's boarded.
So you're really trying to, maintain the natural resources in,
Yes.
Like you said, cutting down the brush so that these other trees that are healthy can flourish.
Yes.
And also just helping the buildings, not disintegrate anymore.
Right. In 2003, when I was on the resource person, I served on the Conservation Commission, and I was a resource person to the original reuse committee. We entered some of the buildings, and I noted that there was a lot of mold that had started to grow inside the buildings. And at that time, we asked DCAM, the Division of Capital Asset Management, to put vents on some of the windows to allow air to get into the building, because mold grows when moisture gets into a building and doesn't dry out enough to prevent mold growth. So at that time, the state put on some small louvers through the boards that allow the building to breathe. And you can see them. They look like little aluminum louvers. And in the buildings that I've been in recently to do more boarding up, It's been very effective. I haven't detected any mold in the buildings as I did in 2003. So they're dry and the insides are in what I would call a stable condition.
Which is terrific. Now, tell me a little, for maintaining, there are costs involved. So can you tell me a little bit about how much the town has spent since we purchased the land? And
Sure. Initially, we spent about $150,000 on just simple maintenance costs related to, ongoing costs related to grounds, taking care of the grounds, mowing the grass, picking up the leaves in the fall. That was about $150,000 I would estimate as a good carrying cost. And also we spent about, I'd say, another $100,000 or so on one-time costs. And the one-time costs are related to, as I mentioned, boarding up the windows. And in some instances, we've actually had to brick up certain places where we noted break-ins more than once. So if someone breaks into the same place more than once, we actually brick it in and to prevent them from going into the same place again. And again, Public Works has been excellent with that. They've saved the town a lot of money just by being able to help out and do some of the work themselves.
Yeah, they're great. So there's different options that are being considered by the Master Planning Committee and certainly driven by the town and what they want. One that has been talked about is, mothballing the buildings for future use. So, people would love to save, I think, as many buildings as as we can. Can you explain what mothballing is?
Sure, and mothballing relates to a little bit of, as we just discussed, putting vents in the windows because it creates a condition where the building can breathe and you don't have an environment where mold can grow. And so that keeps the building dry on the inside, and that has the effect of lessening the amount of paint that might deteriorate and peel. So mothballing includes ventilation of the building. It includes getting the vines that are growing on the outside of the bricks away from the building because the roots get into the mortar and can help to deteriorate the building in that way. And the covering up of the windows also helps to protect all the glass and the wooden structures that are inside the windows for a future reuse. The last step in the mothballing procedure to allow the buildings to remain in a certain condition for a number of years would be protection of the roof. In my business, where I've gone to many hazardous waste sites, problems are created by roofs that cave in because when a roof caves in, it has the effect of mixing the waste. And mixed waste is always more expensive than being able to segregate waste to recycle building materials. So part of my goal over the next couple of years, if we end up holding on to the property, would be to have an assessment done of the roof conditions, the gutter conditions, the conditions of the beautiful slate roof that these buildings have, which is for the most part excellent, but just making sure that there's no progressive deterioration on the rooftops so that we don't get water inside the building that will eventually cause the roof to cave in, and that will again cost either the town or a future developer even more money to have to rehabilitate or to demolish and remove the buildings.
So you mentioned, so you were doing all this so to keep the buildings standing. Can you give us an idea of, how long we can expect, putting this care in, these buildings are going to be okay?
So the buildings are in various states of deterioration. As I said, about 17 of them are actually structurally sound as far as entry goes. And those buildings, I could anticipate those buildings could last into the foreseeable future.
Is this the core campus we're talking about?
These are the buildings that we see in the core campus, the brick buildings that were built in 1896 and 1897. They were built to be very structurally sound. They have granite foundations, and the masonry is excellent on the buildings. And so those 17 buildings, I think, with the proper mothballing, which includes boarding, ventilation, and some roof, minor roof repairs at times, they could last well into the foreseeable future. And by that I mean decades.
Wow.
They could easily last decades in the condition that they're in. For the 12 buildings that are in a lesser state or more higher degree of deterioration, one by one, without any kind of attention, particularly to the mortar, those buildings would start to deteriorate. And that might mean that corners might start to fall. You might have sections of brick that peel off. Areas around windows where ice can get in, around the valleys and the soffits of the buildings where ice can get and water can deteriorate the buildings. Once a building starts to deteriorate, it accelerates. And so I would say those buildings could deteriorate within 5 to 10 years. They'd need, certain buildings would need more specific attention, but they certainly wouldn't all need them at the same time.
And are we talking about more of the newer buildings? Is that,
No, these are some of the older buildings that do have areas where they would need attention within the next 5 to 10 years. Some of the newer buildings, for instance, Building 27, which is the old cafeteria building in the middle, that has areas that need some attention, but nothing substantial.
Okay.
In fact, I don't see any substantial area on any of the building that would need significant attention in the near term. I think it's just a watching and waiting game, and also to pay attention to it, keep our eyes on it, and just pay attention to those places that need some repair when they need some attention.
Now, the newer buildings, some of them built,
some of the newer buildings, like turn of the century, 1904, the R building in the back, which is the building that has the fence around it, and on the west side of the campus, Building 7, which is a big brick building that has beautiful cornices on it. Those are in fairly good condition, but one of the questions will be for a future use whether a developer wants to either rehabilitate a building that's in poor condition or take down a building that's in good condition. And that's a decision that a developer would have to make, or the town, if the town would desire to repurpose a certain building. And I guess a good example of that, a lot of people have expressed an interest in keeping the chapel. And I was in the chapel at the beginning of January. It's in very good condition. It does need work. There's one place inside where water has penetrated one of the valleys on the roof. And so it does need work, but it's not so far gone that it couldn't be rehabilitated. I mean, we have the original stained glass windows that belong to the chapel, and I've seen it when the light comes through the stained glass into the open space inside the chapel. It's beautiful lighting inside there. There's a beautiful stage. So the chapel has a lot of potential. It is one of the original buildings from 1896. It's called the Lee Chapel. And I was when I was in there in January, David Maxon and I, the town sexton, went in, and we actually rang the bell in the chapel, and it has a beautiful sound.
Isn't that great?
The chapel has a lot of potential, and I think it's in fair enough condition that it can be reused.
And I think the chapel is, really close to a lot of people's hearts. It is iconic. We're using it as one of our images to represent the hospital. One of the extreme scenarios would be taking down all of the buildings except for the Lee Chapel. So what would that involve, John?
To take down all the buildings except for the Lee Chapel would probably be done over a period of time. It would probably take at least a year to a year and a half. And it would involve creating staging areas to be able to segregate the different materials that come with any demolition. Most building materials can be recycled in some fashion. And the brick buildings, the 1897, 1896 buildings at the State Hospital, are largely made of bricks. They don't have a lot of structural steel. There is some. There's piping that enters them from the old heating system. And certainly, we would want to manage any hazardous materials like asbestos or lead paint.
Right.
But these are all known hazardous materials that there are ways to manage them properly. And so I think it would be basically a large recycling job, because everything from the bricks to the slate roofs to the carrying beams, some of them have very large pine carrying beams that are beautiful. They can be recycled. And so we would have to close the property off and work out a plan for demolition and careful management. I wouldn't see it being done all at once. It would have to be a plan that's done over time.
And again, that's an extreme scenario.
Yes.
It's you know, I think a lot of people are hoping we're going to be able to keep, you know,
Sure.
some of the historical buildings. Now you actually are now working on getting accurate estimates of what it would, how much money it would cost to
do some
do some demo. I mean, we need that kind of information just to make a good decision. So when do you think you'll have some of that information
we should
available?
have that information probably by June, I would say, early June, because what that work entails is I have to bring the contractors and the bidders into the 4 buildings that we are looking at for potential demolition, and to come up with an estimate. The planning committee has asked my committee to provide a number for the cost of demolishing the buildings. And I think that's something that the people in town would need to know in order to make an educated decision about whether or not they want to take down some or all of the buildings, whether at once or over time. And so it's a very important number that we need to generate. And the only way we can do that and have an accurate number is to really have the contractors go into the building, assess the conditions in the buildings. And I think from the 4 buildings that we've chosen, which are already in a deteriorated shape, except for building 27, which is the cafeteria building, they're already in a condition that would likely need to be taken down or have substantial renovation work done.
Right. Now, I know the master planning committee is really dedicated and committed to maintaining the historical quality of this land, and I just want to get your take on that. I think you've already alluded to it, but just the character, this wonderful historical character, and the cottage layout, and how I mean, that's pretty special. But what's your take on that, John?
Well, it's a significant site, both culturally from a historical standpoint, because it is one of the last places that the public can actually walk around and see how people with mental health issues were managed and treated through time. I mean, the State Hospital was for 18 years an asylum where people were locked up no matter what their physical, whether it was a physical or mental ailment, and following that it became a hospital and treatment center. So from that standpoint, it's culturally significant from a historical standpoint. To me, it has also some importance historically for its land. And by that I mean, it's actually what I would call a drumlin, which is a landform that's formed inside a glacier. That is football shaped, it's oval in shape. These landforms are particularly useful for agricultural purposes. And so it was called Castle Hill. And Richard DeSorga and I are trying to figure out the origin of the name Castle Hill. It started out as a farm. The land that, high land like Castle Hill that the hospital is built on, is very important from an agricultural standpoint. It has a particular kind of soil called Paxton soils, and Paxton soils are very well suited to hay growth, root vegetables, and especially apple trees and fruit trees. And part of the reason for that is because it's at a high elevation, fruit trees do especially well because they're not subject to frost. When you're at lower elevations, you expose fruit trees to frost. And so when you're up on a hill, like the land surrounding the hospital, it has high potential for agricultural use. To protect it from frost is good sunshine and air, and that land faces the west. And as it faces the west, it gets a lot of bright sunshine. The hospital at one point generated 500 barrels of apples a year from that property.
That's amazing, yeah. I mean, the land is exceptional growing land.
It's perfect for that.
And we have the two parcels on either side of what the town owns that the state actually owns. And the only uses for that, I believe, are agricultural.
Yes, both of the lots, we call them A1 and A2, are designated as agricultural land by the legislature. So it has to be used for agricultural purposes. And in its history, the hospital was a completely self-sustaining community that survived because of the land, the connection to the land, and being able to provide for all of the food sources that the patients needed there. And I think that would be an important piece of any future plan to somehow maintain its connection to the agricultural use of the surrounding land.
Yeah, I agree, John. Now, recently you gave a very well-attended tour of the State Hospital property, and I was there. I was learning new things, and I know that you have plans to do a couple of more tours at least in the near future. Why do you think those tours are important? We got 60 people at the last one.
I think the tours are important really to educate people in town about the past use of the property, but to understand how it could be used in the future. What are the possibilities? And because in my business, I never study a site unless I actually walk its ground. You have to go out and actually see the land, see its slopes, see what animal communities, the wildlife that's on the site, what's growing there. And if you don't see that, you don't get a sense for the vision of what it can be.
Right.
And so I wanted to provide these tours so that people not only get a sense of the way the land and site was used in its past because of its historical importance, but looking into the future, what are the options and range of things that the property could be repurposed for? And I think, that's a very difficult task for the planning committee.
Right.
What they're doing is very hard work. We spent several years mediating how to clean up and preserve the overlook at the Charles. And I know how much work it is to think about all the feasible options for a property like this, so it's no small task.
Indeed. Now, you have seen over the past year, as you've been taking care of the land and taking care of the buildings, there's been kind of some organic uses, passive uses, natural uses, whatever, however you want to call it, that have sprung up. So can you talk a little bit about what you've seen happen in terms of people and the uses?
Sure. I think the biggest use that seems to be growing is that people in town are coming out and exploring it and walking. I mean, everyone's doctor is telling them to get out and exercise, and so many people live sort of in a silo where they go to their office every day, they come home, and they watch the news, or they read a book, and they go to bed. But doctors are telling people, look, you need to get out and walk.
Right.
And I've seen a lot more people, now that they realize that it's open and available to get out and walk. It's a beautiful place to walk.
So pretty.
And we encourage people to go up and walk the property. It helps us with security, having a lot of eyes there.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's the greatest increase in use for any kind of recreation is just passive walking around both the Overlook Park but also the core campus. It's paved.
Right.
And as I said, Public Works is doing a great
easy.
job maintaining the roads through the campus. And so that's one passive use. I mean, I've seen other uses up to and including falcon training
Yeah,
at the Overlook.
Interesting.
Dog walking is invited, and I think they're all chipping in and helping to keep it clean and maintained as far as and a safe place for the animals to come out and get some exercise too. So I hope that more people will come up and walk around, and part of the reason for my tours was just to invite more people to do that.
Right. And it is terrific because you do have the mix of the paved roads that are protected, there's no cars, and then you could get a more difficult hike by going through the land that is just not, you know, that's just pure.
Yeah, the property is a city in itself.
Right.
I mean, there were up to 3,000 people living there, and it's a very quiet place. I find it's very peaceful there.
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
And you can see why it was chosen as a location for a state hospital because of the peacefulness of it and the fresh air.
Yeah.
And you can either walk along the woodland margin.
Right.
And there's a lot of different and interesting birds to see along there. People do horseback riding. So there's a lot of potential there to get outside, walk for an hour or two, and then get in your car and go home.
Yeah, it's great. Now, in the last year, what is something that's really just surprised you?
What surprised me is how many people from Medfield haven't been up to the campus to walk around. I mean, I've met several people on my tours and just while I'm driving through the campus that have said, gee, I've lived in Medfield for 25 years and I only have seen the front of this place. I've never been towards the back and seen the property. And I think people should take the time to go up and see. You can look at the new water tower, which is nearing completion. It should be completed in May. I think that's really surprised me that a lot of people that lived in town have never been up there. And there's a few people in town that worked there, and it's great to walk up there with Ann Thompson or somebody that's been in town a long time that knows how it was used. It adds a lot to just a simple walk around the campus.
And I think part of that probably is because you couldn't go up there when the state owned it, but it is now our land. And so we can get up there and really enjoy this magnificent piece of property. So
yeah, and I don't want to leave out the sledding hill is also town property.
Yes.
On the south side of Hospital Road, and most people at one point have been on a sled down the sledding hill, but that's also another place where there's walking trails. You can pass through that area and continue walking onto the campus area.
And there's a couple of trails that go right through.
There are.
The Bay Colony Trail, I think, go right through, and I think there's another one as well.
There are signs planned for the Overlook Park that will give people maps and some directions about where the trails lie and how far you can really walk. And it's a long way. If you want to walk for miles, you really can. If you want to take that long of a hike, it's open for that purpose.
And with the new gateway, we have a beautiful new canoe launch that people can make make use of.
It's
it is lovely.
Excellent spot to put your canoe in, or put your canoe in at Orchard Street, and do the entire section of the Charles River, and you could take your canoe out at the Overlook Park. So yeah, it's a great little spot, and also very peaceful and a good place to do some bird watching. I know some people that like to do that. Yeah,
lovely. All right, now here's a loaded question for you. Okay, as someone who now has taken care of the land for really a long time, John, you really put a lot of energy into the remediation and now the care. And as you're a resident of Medfield, what would you like to see up there?
I guess I would call it sensible development. I think if it's done in a sensible way, and this is why the task before the planning committee is so difficult, sensible development is the best option for it. Do it in a way that it isn't, you look at it and you think, wow, there's too much here. It was overdeveloped. And I think part of the great thing about the town having bought the property is that we have control over that. Right. We have a say in how it will be developed. And so whatever development goes up there, if it is to be developed, it should be done in a way that is sensitive to the past use of the property, and also for the future use, so that it's not overdeveloped. I think that the public should always have some access both to the Gateway Park and maybe to the land behind the R building, which is way in the back, the bordering land to Dover. I look at that land and it really reminds me of a landscape that hasn't changed in 15,000 years. It's a rolling field that's never been built on. And I think it's very important to protect some of that land for the future.
Well, that, I think that your opinion is very valuable in all of this, John. And I thank you so much for taking your time today to come and talk to me and share your knowledge with the town of Medfield.
Thank you, and I hope I get some people. I'm planning 2 additional tours.
Yep, right.
One in April, late April, will focus on the history of treatment at the hospital, and a second tour on the natural environment at the hospital. And I look forward and invite people to come out and take a walk with me.
That'll be great. I mean, and they're always so interesting.
Thank you.
So I want to thank everyone for watching today. I want to let you know that you can find out more about what's happening with the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee by going to our website at www.mshvision.net. We also have a Facebook page, MSH Vision, as well, a Twitter feed, and we have newsletters that go out once a week, and we invite you to sign up for the newsletters. You can do that by going to the Facebook page or by going to our website. So again, thanks so much for watching today, and be on the lookout for more interviews coming up. Thanks a lot.
Medfield TV. Community shows.